Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Casey Zirkus. I'm the content strategist on the RSA conference team. We're thrilled to have you join us today, and just wanted to give you a little bit of background about how this webcast came to be. I was actually myself thinking of topics that I could submit to speak at WESIS and thinking about, what it is that I can share with the audience. And then that led to conversations with WESIS and the conference team. And we decided that maybe collaborating and working together and bringing together experts in the industry who were just like us, looking to be speakers somewhere someday, what was the trajectory of their path. So we're super excited to be joined by a panel of impressive women in the industry. And I am now going to turn it over to Lynn to give you a little bit more information.
Great, thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Dome, Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WICYS, W-I-C-Y-S. And we're really grateful to be able to co-host today's panel discussion with the RSA conference. As you can imagine, both Casey and myself get lots of questions on how to submit a stellar proposal. And so we decided to put together a stellar panel, have it moderated by the fabulous Diana Kelly. And then here we are today. And so I just want to encourage everyone that's listening that this is our opportunity, even myself and Casey, for us to get all the information that we need out of this panel. And so please put your questions in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and Diana will get to all those questions at the end of the discussion. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Diana, and she'll take it from here.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you so much, Casey and WESIS and RSA, and a huge thank you to the incredible panel that we have with us. We have Tanisha Martin, who is the Executive Director of Black Girls Hack, Global Advisory Board of EC Council, and an adjunct professor at Voorhees College. Welcome, Tanisha.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Thank you. Also with us today is Alyssa Miller, who is the BISO for S&P Global Ratings, a hacker, a researcher, and an RSA and TEDx speaker. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
And Chloe Mastagi, who is the growth strategy consultant at Standout in Tech, a keynote speaker, and a board member at We Open Tech. Hi, Chloe.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. I thought to get us started, it might be fun to have a little bit of an icebreaker. So we'll go around. Tanisha, let's start with you. What's the one talk that you had rejected that really surprised you? The one that you were just absolutely sure was going to make it, but didn't?
I actually put it in a talk to speak at WICYS this year to talk about diversity in cybersecurity and what organizations can do to try to increase the diversity pipeline. And the response that I got back was, that we have a lot of these types of, talks that were submitted. So I was like, we need to see more of this. We need, not just women, but we need to see more people of color and, more, diversity of people. So I was really shocked, but I'm glad that some of them made it in.
Yeah. All right. Chloe, how about you?
So there was this one that I kind of created, which was about similar. It's like marginalized genders, a little bit about, who are they and what does that mean? How do we bring equity to marginalized genders? And so that was kind of one of the talks that I submitted. It's definitely gotten rejected. But yeah, it seems to be a lot of people submitting talks on different areas of diversity and inclusion. And I've also noticed that it's not being accepted as much because they're being flooded with it at this time.
Which is a great point, because you probably both had really good stellar submissions, but sometimes there are just so many topics in the same area that it becomes really difficult to get to land with that topic. How about you, Alyssa? Anything that you submitted that surprised you, didn't get in?
I mean, there's been a bunch, but I'll actually use the most recent example, which is the one that I submitted to Black Hat this year. I've submitted to Black Hat before and been rejected. It happens all the time, but this year I thought for sure was the year, because I had a talk discussing, the supposed skills gap and whatnot, which, it's been talked about before, but, this talk came with a lot of firsthand research that I did with surveys, with interviews, with all of this. I had all this primary research to throw at it, and it was all covered in the abstract. I thought for sure this was the year, because I know Black Hat really loves that firsthand research. Nope, still didn't get in. So
yeah, I too got rejected from Black Hat this year.
We should make a club, you guys. The Black Hat rejection.
Black Hat
Club.
rejection.
I'm down for
I
that.
think that's a big club.
Right?
A lot of people
Thousands.
and they can only take so much.
I agree. So, Tanisha, I know one of your passion points about a stellar proposal that's going to get accepted is looking at trends that are emerging before it's become sort of a saturated area. How would you go about that? How do we know when something's becoming, like diversity? It was, nobody was talking about it, and now we're being told too many people are talking about it. So how do you find that sweet spot?
I think that you have to take a look and see what the theme of the conference is, and what they're trying to do as far as the tracks are concerned. So I think that diversity is one of those topics that I think generally covers like across the industry, and I feel like it's always timely because we still don't have 51% of women represented in the industry. So like I feel like it's one of those things that never is going to go away until we get that parity. But I think that the other thing is that as we start to see some of the things that pop up into the news, I don't think that a lot of it is nouvelle, but I think that some of it, like now they just did there was the hack on the Colonial Pipeline, right? So I expect that within the next couple of conferences we're going to see a lot of white papers and papers that are written up about the oil and the critical infrastructure. But these are issues that have faced the cybersecurity industry for probably decades at this point. This is not something new. It's just because it's, I guess, in your face at this point. That's the reason why that we're seeing it pop up. But I think just taking a look at seeing what's going on and what's garnering interest.
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually like to build off of that because it's such an important point. Because the other part of it, to grab onto that example, the Colonial Pipeline, is recognize that that's an emerging trend, but also recognize that because it is, a lot of people, to your point, Tanisha, a lot of people are probably going to submit talks. So one thing I always tell people, you don't necessarily have to have the most novel talk in the world. You can talk about topics that have been covered before. Like you said, I mean, we've been here forever with, ransomware attacks and everything else, it feels like. But how do you put a different spin on it, right? That's the thing that is so crucial to getting accepted is, you're going to see a bunch of, as you said, white papers and other things. So when you write your talk, how do you put a different spin on it that maybe people aren't expecting, or is maybe the part of it that makes it new and novel, that now somebody reading says, oh, that's a talk that we want to have in this conference because, wow, no one ever thought of that before. I got that feedback from RSA last year with my talk. So, I mean, I did a talk on deepfakes, which a lot of people were talking about. There were a lot of my colleagues were doing talks on deepfakes, but I came to it with just a little bit different perspective. And the feedback I got from RSA was that was why they chose mine instead of, countless others that they had considered.
Yeah, I would also add on there, if you're looking for new trends, is just to listen to the community, listen around you, listen to your colleagues, listen to people that you follow, because you'll start seeing these patterns in a sense, like where you keep hearing the same thing, or like, for example, burnout. The talk on burnout that I did was because I kept hearing people saying like, I think I have burnout. I think I'm going through burnout. And so right before the pandemic hit, this was like the perfect time for me to start talking about it. So when the pandemic hit, it took off because it was a trend that was already present, but no one was talking about it and no one had solutions for it. So I think that's the other thing, is just to listen. But as Alyssa mentioned, bring your own special sauce to it in a sense, because you have a different background from other person who's going to present it. So don't be discouraged. Think of it more of like, what do I bring to the table from my experiences, my background, that makes this something that people have not seen yet.
Yeah,
and I think also to Alyssa's point, putting your own research in there and actually presenting research that you have done, as opposed to maybe doing anecdotal or somebody else's research, I think will put you ahead of other people who may just be talking about trends in general.
Yeah, we had a lovely, it's not a question, but it's a comment from the audience that I'd like to share and repeat, which is that they hope that diversity is not a trend, but is considered a mission and a vision objective. So yeah, +1 to that. So both Alyssa and Tanisha, Alyssa and Tanisha, sorry, you mentioned this. Alyssa, let's start with you on this one. You talked about the feedback and getting feedback. And I think that people who submit don't always understand what happens on the other side. And I know we've all worked both as speakers, but also as program committee, as conference organizers, and trying to figure out, who to put on the agenda. What is that about feedback? How can people benefit from getting that feedback?
Oh, feedback is critical. In fact, some of the CFP teams that I've been on that I've loved the most have been the ones where we were very conscious about providing feedback. Unfortunately, not all conferences do. But feedback is one of those things. Here's the deal, right? Everyone gets declined. I don't care who you are. I don't care how big a name you are. You can be Bruce Schneier, Jason Street, Katie Messiers. I don't care. Everybody gets those declines every year, right? I mean, it happens to all of us. So the key is taking that feedback if you can get it. And I encourage people, reach out to the conference if they don't give you specific feedback and see if they'll give you feedback. It can't hurt to ask. And the reason being, that's how you take that, what feels, I mean, you're emotional, it's frustrating, you're disappointed, but turn that into a growth opportunity. Like, identify what it was. Sometimes, I mean, it might just be something about the way that your submission like connected with that particular conference, or, maybe there was just something about your submission that didn't quite land the way you thought it would. So getting that perspective and understanding is so critical. And honestly, if you don't get feedback from the conference, maybe even reach out to a couple of people in the industry that colleagues, friends, whatever, and just send them the same abstract that you sent to the conference and see if maybe they have feedback for you. Maybe they have some ideas on, wow, yeah, you could have done this differently. You could have done, maybe tweak this a little bit more. I mean, personally, I've actually done that for a couple of people, and I've actually seen it work, which is great, because they come to me, hey, can you tell me about this? And then next time they submitted it, it got accepted.
Yeah, feedback is really important to have. And then I definitely do reach out to people and be like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this, why I was rejected? And it gives you really an idea also how the reward looks like and how they're working and they're functioning. It provides some transparency, but it also showcases some issues too we still have in submission process. For example, one of the talks that was rejected was, they said like, oh, there is no problems over in our country when it comes to gender equality. We have gender equality here. That's why we rejected a talk, was one. The other one was for an Israeli conference. They said, we reject your talks because you're Iranian. And yeah, so it's really good because it gives you an idea whether or not you want to submit your paper to these conferences again if they're not practicing good ways to prevent gatekeeping in a sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we did have another comment from the audience. No questions yet, but another really good comment, which is talking about proposal reviewers learning to provide polite and meaningful feedback. And that is something that's really, Chloe, you made a great point. If the reviewers are not able to provide useful, constructive feedback, maybe this isn't a conference that you want to be involved in. And that kind of touches on something else, Tanisha, that I was wondering if you could start us off with, which is about the fear. It can be really scary to be judged by your peers, or if you're new in the field, to get out there with an idea. Any advice on how people can kind of shore up their confidence and get to that first proposal if they're first-time speakers, or recover from a bad rejection?
I would say just to try to, get as much confidence as you can. I would say have other people take a look at your proposal, like Alyssa was saying, to see if they can provide you feedback, to see if it's landing like how you would want it to. And I would say just to keep trying, I think Chloe mentioned, like everybody gets rejected, so it's not like it's a personal thing, like they have, something against you personally. I think, as someone mentioned earlier, to use it as a growth opportunity and to, try to learn from it. I think that, as women, we tend to have a perception of not having confidence or having like some imposter syndrome. And I think that tends to creep out sometimes as we're, trying to step into new areas that we may not be like the most comfortable in. So I think it's important that we try to, as much as possible, try to overcome, those fears and just step out. I don't even necessarily know if it's on faith, but, just to step out and try. And, if you fall flat on your face, that's how, some of the epic careers of the people that we take a look at, are built. It's from, failing and then growing and then, learning from those failures. So, if you never have any L's, then, you're not really going to appreciate, winning as much, so I think it's just a matter of just having confidence.
So I hope you don't mind. I want to build off of that one too, because again, spot on. The thing is, I'll even take it one step further, and that is, if you're nervous or you're scared, look at it this way. Go into it expecting to be declined. All right. And don't look at it as rejection. First of all, it's not rejection. They're, as Tanisha said, they're not rejecting you. They're reading through hundreds of talks, and yours just in comparison, wasn't the one that they wanted for the conference. But if you go into it expecting, and this is a key thing for imposter syndrome anytime, expecting that decline isn't a failure. It's one step in the process of getting to being a speaker, right? I mean, if you go in expecting that, hey, you know what, I'm probably going to submit this 3 or 4 times before it gets accepted, maybe 10 times before it gets accepted, and I'm going to have to keep revising based on feedback and working with people. Now you see it as a process, and now it's not so scary, because the scary part is everybody feels like, well, I'm going to get rejected. I'm going to be embarrassed, and, people are going to be judging me. No, they're not. I can tell you I'm not going to say it never happens that the review committee doesn't judge you, but generally if they're judging you, it's because you sent in like a lazy proposal. Like you wrote like a 2-sentence thing when they gave you up to 2,000 words or something. I mean, that's what'll get you judged. But if you put effort into it and it's just not the thing that people, didn't connect, just take that. The whole key to learning and growing is failure, if you will. And I hate the word failure because it has that goofy connotation, but you need to go through those steps. As Tanisha said, look even beyond security. How many actors got declined for parts millions and millions of times? How many, stand-up comedians or any performer? I mean, let's face it, speaking to some degree is kind of a performance, right? So performance art all over the place, dancers, musicians, you name it. They all talk about how they had to pay their dues or they had to go through all the declines before they finally got that big break. It's the same for public speaking.
Yeah. And actually one other thing that I would throw in here, if, for that first talk, is that if you know somebody and they're an experienced public speaker, you could submit with them, because very often that can really help a lot. It helps to allay the fear a little bit. You've got somebody who's a little bit more experienced, and that's something that I know I do a lot of co-speaking with new speakers, because I know that it's important to help the next folks get their first gig. To this point though, Chloe, we have questions about the feedback here, about how do conferences provide feedback? Are there best practices about how they provide feedback? I'd love anybody to hop in after Chloe, but is there a way to provide, how do you provide meaningful feedback when there are hundreds of proposals or even maybe thousands that are coming in?
So I have seen different groups do different things. I would say like one of the things is like they have like a form already and they fill out this form, and then that's based on their selection process. So it's on a scale, and then you send that over to the people, and then you can always have a little section of comments. I think that is probably the best, because that, in a sense, it's very helpful when we see it in that way. But I have seen it in different ways where people actually take the time and they write like a whole paragraph or a couple paragraphs about why they like the talk, what are the parts that they were concerned about for accepting the talk. And that's a different way. But if you are worried about timing and how much time you can dedicate to letting people know, the form is like the easiest solution, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Tanisha or Alyssa, have you seen anything different or anything else?
I mean, so two things I'll throw here. First of all, the form is important because and what the aspect, and I think this is where Chloe's going, but if not, I'll throw it in there too, is that you're catching it in real time, right? Like as you're reviewing it, you get to the end, it's fresh in your head. You can immediately put that information in the notes as you're scoring it. Because yeah, most of the systems I've ever used, there's always some type of rating or scoring that goes on to each one. So as you're doing that, you can capture it right away. And that's important. Like I did one conference one time where we didn't write down any feedback, but we made it available at the end. We said, if you want feedback, when we sent out the decline emails, they could email us back. Well, then we had to go back and we had to remember what it was about that submission. And so catching it right away makes it easy. And then to the reviewers out there, this is what I'm going to tell you. It's the same thing we tell security people all the time. Your recommendations need to be actionable. If you're going to tell somebody, you're going to provide feedback. If you just say, this wasn't what we were looking for, what does that mean? No, tell them the things that you specifically, I would like to see maybe more firsthand research, or, I would have liked to have seen you develop this and tell us more about what lessons would be learned in this particular talk, or whatever it is, doing those things and giving them something where it's actually the things that would have, caused you to rate it higher. Get that information in there, because sometimes I see review people get frustrated by the quality of some of the items that they look at, but it's like, a lot of these people don't know. They've never done this before. They've done it very rarely, and they don't have our perspective as reviewers of being in that position and all the things that we have to think about. So help give them that perspective so they can do better and give you better quality in return.
Yeah.
I would just say that, I guess for me, the thing that I tend to see is that, we tend to see some of the same people who are reviewing, across some of these different conferences. And what I'd like to see as far as the conferences themselves is for them to make sure that they're bringing, a diversity in terms of the people who are reviewing, as well as, the people who are actually speaking, right? Because, we see these kind of things in hiring. You tend to hire people who look like you, or who have some of the same traits as you, or remind you of you, or run in your same circles, right? So if we are seeing year after year some of the same, and it's like the stereotype is the older white males who are speaking at conferences, and those are the people who are making the decisions for the conferences. Maybe they're not, don't have the diversity of thought of, hey, these are some other things that people are interested in actually hearing about, right? So like if you hear the same thing year after year at the same conferences, then, there's no point in, you spending all of the money to actually go to them. You want to learn about new things. You want to hear different opinions and thoughts, different types of research that are not, kind of the same old. So I think the same way that, we're advocating that people need to submit, original thought, pieces as far as their research and, original CFPs, proposals, we also need to have, kind of like some diversity and some change in the people who are actually doing the reviewing as well.
I agree 100% on representation matters on those boards. We have seen so many boards where it's all white men, and this is never going to be beneficial for anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And actually one point on about, how do you give really thoughtful, meaningful feedback to thousands or hundreds? It takes time. So don't forget that as devastating as it can be when you get a rejection, there's a whole lot of work, and it could have been devastating for the program committee to reject your talk. It may have just been, so don't forget that. And how do you provide meaningful feedback? One thing that I've done and I've seen done is that there's kind of shorthand in the committee. And if it's not automatically given to the person who submits, because not every conference automatically gives the feedback. And then if the person who got rejected wanted more feedback, then the program committee will go back and create a more thoughtful set of recommendations. So that's another reason that if you did get rejected and you're really curious why, And that can help. So we have a question here on saying, I'm not quite hearing turning that no into yes. This is not magic. So we're not saying if you got rejected from RSA or Black Hat that you can go back and petition that they're going to accept your talk. It's more of a long-term no into yes of you may have gotten rejected. How do you get at one conference? How do you get accepted the next time? But any other tips and tricks? And, Alyssa, let's start with you. Any other tips and tricks on, like, you've gotten those no's. What do you do now to start to work towards the yes?
Yeah. So as you're developing, there's two things I think I'll cover here. The first one's really simple, and understand that developing a talk is work. Okay. You've heard us mention like primary research over and over again and things. Yeah, that is part of it. Like you've got to come with something. It's not just, hey, I read the RFC and I'm going to present on the RFC on, some authentication mechanism or something that people can go read the RFC. Tell me how you applied that in a cool way or something you built in a lab or whatever it is. You do have to put some effort into this. In fact, I mean, I've heard the stories too. People talk about, well, I wrote this talk on the plane on the way to the conference. Well, then I'm kind of bothered by the conference that they actually accepted that talk, unless, I mean, obviously you snowed them or did a really good job of it. But, don't feel like that's what you're going to do, especially as a new speaker. Maybe people who are seasoned and have done it and they've got research and they can just quickly pull it up together and write a talk. Yeah, great. I get that. But you've got to have something. But here's the thing for me, as again, as a committee reviewer, I look for those talks that speak to the audience. When you're writing a proposal, remember whatever abstract you write, in most cases, that's what gets printed in a program somewhere. And when you make it, you get into that program, you're now essentially competing with the other speakers who are at least in your same time slot to get people to come to your talk and not somebody else's. I've seen the submissions where people write the talk to the committee, right? Like they actually know who's on the committee and they write specifically because they're targeting the people on the committee. Forget that. It's good to know who they are, but focus on how do you write this thing in a way that's exciting. So I'm talking about, titles that grab attention. If you say, well, I'm going to talk about the OAuth 2 authentication authorization mechanism. Well, that's boring. Okay. Come up with something exciting. Because your first step is just to have that title that grabs their attention and makes them then want to read your abstract. Now your abstract has to be interesting. And to make it interesting, start by telling us what the problem is. Tell us what the problem is. Tell us what, ultimately you think the solution is, and then what you're going to present. You write it that way, that grabs people's attention because they see that problem, they identify it with it, and they say, yeah, I've been dealing with that too. I want to hear more. What are you going to tell me that I don't already know? And that is crucial. So write your abstract to win the audience, not to impress the review board.
I agree. Do the what and the why in it. You don't have to tell the how. They come to your talk for the how. So do it as a sales or marketing pitch at the end of it. But the other thing is to look over your CFP every month. That's something I do routinely. Is I'll look over CFPs and just be like, okay, what can I do to change this? Even if they've been accepted, I'm going to revise it. I want to make it even more catchy. I want you to know that I'm talking to you directly, to this person. But the what, the why, got to have it in there. Otherwise, you're not going to grab anyone's attention.
Yeah. Tanisha, any other hints on after you got no's, what the next time you submitted, what turned that to yes?
I'd say, make sure that you include in your abstract why the people care, why this is a pressing issue. Just let them know, like Melissa was saying, not just speaking to the people who are reviewing, but, why does the industry care about this thing? Why is it an emerging trend or whatever the issue is? So that people will understand, why it is. Because it could be something that you are viewing from your perspective, but then you're not portraying it in an articulate way or in a way that lets them know, how amazing this talk is going to be. So, you have to kind of make sure that you relay your enthusiasm into the abstract so that, they pick that up as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, because that's the difference, when you have, especially when you have like 2 or 3 or more tracks, this is what's going to get someone to actually come see your track, as opposed to someone else, right? You want people to be interested in what it is that you have to say, so you have to kind of sell your enthusiasm for the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that helped me was that I did a lot more writing, for articles for tech publications before I was doing a lot of speaking. And so I actually carried that over into my abstract approach. So I was kind of laying out the problem. They know what the problem is. The program committee knows they want to go. So you don't have to say this is a problem and then explain stuff with details. You've ruined part of you've taken some of your abstract, your detailed abstract time away, because a lot of the modern submissions are you're gated on how many characters even you can use. So don't lay up the problem. The other thing that, and I keep seeing this as a reviewer on the other side, is people that really give a lot of background on who they are. That's okay. That's going to be in your bio. A lot of program committees are doing research around if you've spoken before, if you've got videos out, even if it hasn't been at a conference, if you've got educational videos. So again, you don't need to put that in the abstract. And that just pulling out over framing the problem really made a huge difference from my no's going to yeses.
That's actually a really important point too, right? Because I've seen those too, where people, they basically give their whole bio again in the abstract, and most of the time you do have limited characters or limited words. And the thing to remember there is a lot of these submissions, depending on the conference, a lot of conferences do double blind reviews, where they don't know who the author of this is. And the problem is when you put your name in there and you say it over and over again, or you give so much bio information, you've actually made it harder on the review committee, because someone at the inset has to go through and take your name and blank it out and take out enough information that it's anonymized enough. So be aware of that too. I mean, a lot of conferences don't, and we could debate for days on what's better that way, but that's important. So just remember, I mean, usually, and I struggle with it personally. Like, I try to write my abstracts to not include my name at all anywhere in the whole thing for that reason. And sometimes it's hard because you have to think about writing it in a very different way, but it can be done. And once you do it a couple of times, you kind of learn the tricks for how to avoid actually needing your name in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Tanisha, we have a question about how do you get accepted to one of the big name conferences like a Black Hat or a DEF CON or RSA, WSIS. If you're new to the field and you haven't discovered the latest O-Day, you don't have deep research to present, was there a way to get accepted? How could you get accepted?
Well, I haven't gotten accepted to one of those conferences yet, but I'm going to say that, just as a rule of thumb, that you don't want to try to go from 0 to DEF CON or 0 to Black Hat, right? So as you said, you're practicing out some of your materials. You could start, for example, doing a workshop or doing a, or you can start off, in some kind of incremental approach, maybe some of the smaller conferences to see if it lands, to see if it resonates with people, and try to build your way up from there, as opposed to going from, hey, I just entered cybersecurity last week and now I'm going to submit my talk to DEF CON and then be mad that they are not going to accept it, right? There's a process to it, and it could be that your talk is just so amazing that you can make it, but I'd say more than likely you need to get up to the point where you can submit it and feel confidence, just by working your way up, just trying it in different places, and seeing what's trending as well.
That's a really good point. I mean, a lot of the conferences, if you've been out and you've submitted to CFPs, a lot of them ask you for videos or anything of when you've spoken before, especially the big ones, because think about a conference the size of RSA or Black Hat. I mean, these companies have huge budgets to put on these conferences. They're very popular. They have lots of submitters. And so they want to make sure whoever they put on that stage is going to deliver a quality product. So it's not that because you're new, they assume that you're not. It's that you're an unknown. And so that makes it harder. So if you don't have something that stands out like an O-Day or, primary research or those other things, it is a higher hill to climb if you're also new to the industry, because you don't have that personal brand recognition. My first conference was GERCON over in Grand Rapids. Like most people haven't even heard of it. And then I built my way up through B-sides and other things. And, before I knew it, I went in, I got accepted to RSA. And check some of those bigger conferences, make that your progression, like you're going to work towards something like that, and then check their sites. I know both RSA and Black Hat have information on their site about how to get accepted.
Yes.
I think a few others do that as well. They actually there's different, you can do some searches out there. You'll find different ones. I think the one on RSA's site is still there, where they actually, RSA and Black Hat both, I know, have taken like past submissions that they really liked. And then they walk you through them and they highlight what it was about that submission that made it gold to them. So read that too, because that'll give you not only just pointers on how to write, but it'll also give you some perspective on what those review committees are thinking about when they look at these talks.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And actually, Alyssa and I put in a talk for Grace Hopper this year with a couple of other colleagues. And that was, we studied that. We very carefully studied, because Grace Hopper is a very different kind of conference and submission process. So yeah, that's great advice. We have some more advice from the audience, which is around Toastmasters. If you're nervous about speaking and you want to be able, and you don't have media training, for example, Toastmasters is a great way to get practice as doing also what Tanisha said, which is kind of qualifying for the big marathon by running some half marathons and some less famous marathons. Chloe, are there any groups in InfoSec that if say I want to send my talk out and I want somebody to help me get a feel for, is this going to land or not? How could I get help with that?
Yeah, I've done it in different ways. One is I contacted different organizations that are there to like empower people like me or what I identify as, and they usually will respond like, oh, well, we have someone here who can kind of look over and mentor you a little bit on how to create a better CFP. I've also have done it where I've reached out to previous speakers asking for like 15 minutes of their time to get on their calendar to go over in live time how to do better on a CFP they're in, or if I want some extra advice. And if you are going to do that, please know their background in a sense. Like I've had people reach out and be like, hey, Chloe, can you do the CFP for me? Can you rewrite my CFP for me? It's like, I don't really have that much time. So you also need to know what my background is. So if you want me to write up a 0-day CFP, guess what? That's not going to happen. Like I'm not probably going to be able to be the best person for that. So I think that's the whole thing, is to reach out to the speakers that are talking within your area of focus. And then, remember, time is limited, 15 minutes. Don't send it to them ahead of time. Just be like, hey, I'll share my screen for 15 minutes. Let's go through it together. That's always the best part. I think it's just only say 15 minutes and keep it at 15 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I would add to that. I mean, there are some organizations that have, for example, first-time speaker programs. Like I know a couple of, organizations or groups that, do that, where, they'll let you either, do a talk, as a first-time speaker, or they will, pair you with someone who has the experience so that you can kind of like, get your experience up. And you just basically find groups that you identify, so groups like WISIS, or I know that a group I'm a part of, Blacks in Cybersecurity, they have a first-time speaker program that they help to try to promote, to try to get people to experience, because we want to see more diversity. So groups like WISIS are going to provide you with the resources that you need to try to get there, so that you can we can start to see more women who are operating in the space.
Yeah.
And also say and point out that there are a couple conferences that do that too. Diana Initiative is a great one. They do 2 rounds of CFP, and they make people available as, I forget what they call them, like speaker mentors or something like that. And you can actually request somebody to work with to try to get your submission in. I know, and sorry, Lynn, I'm throwing this out there because I know this is kind of hush hush, but we've had conversations within WISIS about doing this too. We didn't make it for this year, but we are looking at ways to see if it happens. I hope it does, but it's something we would like to do. Kellen Benson put together a great conference this year called IntroSecCon. And every speaker was a new speaker, and everyone got paired up with a mentor to help them. So check that one out too. I believe his plan is to keep doing it. They put on a great conference this year, so I would hope that it's going to continue. But yeah, look for some conferences. Look for those ones that do multiple rounds. Circle City Con does multiple rounds as well. So, you know, even if you can't get a mentor, you at least can get that feedback between, and you can submit for the second round if you got rejected from the first. Those are good strategies too to kind of help you out and get through that process.
And you got a note from Lynn. You're okay. You got her blessing, Alyssa. So no worries. All right. So how about what constitutes the question is what constitutes a stellar proposal? And I was wondering if you could either say a talk that you submitted that you just knew you nailed it, it got accepted, or as a program committee member, a proposal that came in and just absolutely blew you away. And Alyssa, let's start with you on that.
Damn it, I was trying to think of one. I think of a personal
I have a comment.
Wait, who has one? Who has Tanisha? Do you
I was
have
about
one?
to say, I just have a thought. So I don't think that submitting a stellar proposal is like a formulaic thing. It's not like if you have A plus B, you know, that you're going to end up with something that's stellar. I think that there are a lot of things that go into the process of it. And, you know, part of it is timing, you know, like if we have, you know, for example, a lot of ransomware attacks, right? And your talk is about ransomware, then it may be timely that, you know, people are interested in trying to figure out how to protect their organizations. Or, you know, if someone wanted to talk about how they recovered, you know, let's say a whole bunch of money from Bitcoin, you know, I think that would probably be a timely talk that people would appreciate hearing from. So just to realize that it's not like, you know, you have to have specific items in order to be able to have a stellar proposal.
That's a great point. I mean, right, we all mentioned how we've been rejected. We're also all speakers who've been accepted a number of times. If there was one perfect way to always get accepted, then we'd never get rejected. So yeah. But how about anything that stood out? I mean, so what's going through my mind is that I was on so I'm part of the RSA conference program committee for the US conference. And on the applied cryptography track a couple of years ago, we got a talk that came in that just we fell absolutely in love with. It was about how to explain quantum crypto with cartoons. And it had what really caught our eye, right? Even look at how everybody is responding. And that's really how this is such a deep, difficult topic. And so the cartoons already had kind of lifted it up. But then it was backed up from this, it's like you had me at cartoons, but then quantum and cartoons. But then it was a clear explanation of how the cartoons were going to be used to demystify this very difficult topic. And it was written succinctly. We understood as soon as we finished that abstract what the presentation was going to be like. And then, you know, it was a very highly rated talk and very successful. And that all came through in the abstract. So that it was a timely topic. It was a really catchy title. And then the abstract just gave us a very clear view of what we were going to, you know, it was like the summary of what we were going to see. So that one stands out in my mind. I don't know if anybody has anything. Okay.
I mean, I'll share. It's mine, which I feel funny about talking about my own stuff this way, but I'm struggling to come. I know there's like a ton of them from CFPs I reviewed, but I mean, I'll go back to the one that got accepted at RSA, and you know, because it was a big deal. I got a lot of really good feedback, and to be blunt about it, RSA used my submission as one of the ones in their guide on how to get accepted. But so specifically, it was 2020. You know, so February 2020, the last in-person conference we did before COVID, right? And, you know, my talk was on deepfakes. So deepfakes was a topic that was getting a lot of talk because a lot of people were thinking about the upcoming election. People were worried about how deepfakes was going to impact that. So it was very timely. Additionally, you know, 2020 deepfakes were only a couple years old. There was a lot of research going on in academic space. So it was a really good topic. But what was interesting about it was, like I said, there were a lot of people talking about it. They were all going down that same path of let's talk about election security. And this is going to be a big threat to election security. And the approach I took was completely different. I said, well, wait a minute, this is RSA. Yeah, there's a limited audience here for election security, but there's a different threat here. Like, what about, how does this, you know, most of the people come to RSA are business people. So what are the threats to business? And that's how I painted it. And so I put it out there in a way, I forget what the even title was. It was something about losing our reality or something, I think was the title, just something to draw people in, right? It wasn't just, hey, let's talk deepfakes or the deepfake threat, okay, whatever. No, it was that. And then, started off that abstract with talking about, this idea of what everybody's talking election security. What about this forgotten side? Well, how does this impact businesses, and how's it, and then, carried on from there. And so I think that just speaks to, how important that can be to take that topic that's trending, but make it your own and look at it in a different light.
Yeah. And make people, for me, it's also not just that, but also I try to make people laugh, because the one thing I've noticed is that when I get people to laugh, I'm getting them to respond that they're actually paying attention. So I'll constantly do things where it'll be interactive. Like most of my talks, there will be a part that's interactive if it was in person. But because of the pandemic and everything, now I've made sure that all my talks have something funny in it. So I took a very serious talk like burnout, and I turned it into something with a bunch of Shibas in it. So every slide there was a Shiba. So I made it fun. And then I would say the talk that I'm very proud of these days is the one I just gave at RSA conference about burnout. I poked fun about how the US didn't prepare enough for the pandemic. And so I did it comparing it to New Zealand. And so throughout the whole thing, I dropped jokes about New Zealand and how New Zealand is I wish we were all in New Zealand right now. So I would do things that were timely and just get people to laugh, especially if you're doing a very, very serious topic and a talk. Making people laugh allows for people to take in more and to be more open and vulnerable in the moment, to really appreciate and pay attention.
Yeah, so I want to grab onto that a little bit, and I'll expand it a little. Put your personality into it. Not everybody is good at making people laugh. I am not a comedian. I am not good at it. If I try to make jokes, I fall flat on my face. You're going to see lots of speakers, and you're going to want to adapt their style and mimic it. I encourage you not to do that. If there's something they do that you can take and it matches up to your personality, great. But otherwise, just be authentic. Put your authentic personality in there. Are you typically, self-deprecating? Well, maybe you can leverage that in your talk. Some people are very funny in their talks. Some people, it's just about the passion they bring. So these are things that, okay, maybe when you deliver that first talk, to make yourself memorable and, keep that coming, but you can also put that into your abstracts as well. Make sure that your personality comes across. Don't, if you're submitting to a very corporate conference and you want to give it your bio and everything a little more corporate spin, great. If you're submitting to a smaller conference, maybe you want to make it a little more informal and fun, so you can kind of match it up to what the conference is too. But get your personality in there, keep it authentic to who you are, because it will make you stronger both in your submission and when you do get on that stage and you're standing up in front of 25, 50, 100, however many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that I think that's really important, because, some people may be coming to the talk based on what it is that you're discussing, but some of it may just be that they're coming because you're giving it, So, Alyssa doesn't want to say hey, I'm going to promote myself or talk about how awesome I am. But, there are probably half of the people who go to see her talks just because of the fact that she's actually offering them. You know what I'm saying? So if you bring your personality, there are probably some people who are there to see what you're saying, but then as much as there are people who want to see, the topic that you're discussing. So that's why it's important to bring yourself, but then also to make sure that you're passionate about whatever the topic is as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. So we talked about, some stellar proposals we've seen or we've submitted. We've talked about always go to the site and see what they think are stellar proposals, because each site is going to have a recommendation of, and they have examples, or most of the major conferences have examples of, this is what we love. So to try and write something like this. What about, though, for a little bit of more speaker prep, is there any talk or any resource that you could recommend? We talked about Toastmasters, but going out and watching somebody who's speaking, maybe get a feel of what it's like to be a good speaker, or how those speakers present. Any touch points that you have, like Chloe, anything that you go to?
Improv. Improv is going
Okay.
to become your best friend. If you feel uncomfortable getting on stage, improv classes will get you feeling more comfortable in your own skin getting on stage, because the thing that you'll realize really fast in improv is that the audience gets embarrassed for themselves, not towards you, in many times. So it's always really good is to have that improv thing, or even just take an acting class, because stage presence does matter when you're giving a talk. If you're not being authentically yourself, you're not going to have that stage presence. So be passionate, be authentic yourself. That's how you get that stage presence. But if you're concerned about that, or you're nervous, or you're shy, Toastmasters are great, improv is great, or just taking one acting class, it will help a lot.
I was also going to say karaoke. So like, I think part of the I guess getting over it is actually getting up in front of people. And most of us, cannot sing. So if you get up and do karaoke, like, even though you know that you can't sing and you could still, survive, then I think that'll kind of give you the confidence to get up there and talk about something that you know that you're good at.
So the other thing I will recommend is go watch old videos of Steve Jobs, of TED Talks, TEDx Talks, some of those really big keynotes. And I don't say this because you're going to be Steve Jobs. Most of us probably will never speak on a stage like that, right? But here's the thing, and this is why I stress with people, every talk I give, from super technical, talking about threat modeling or OAuth 2 or whatever it is, clear up to the high level, keynote talks that I do, I treat it like a keynote. And there's a couple aspects you'll notice with people who give good keynotes. First thing is you start off with a story. And starting off with a story that pertains to the rest of your talk does a couple things for you. And I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this, but first of all, it makes you comfortable. Because now you can tell a story where you don't even have to think about any of the material or anything else, because it's something that happened to you or that happened to someone you know. It's a story you're familiar with already. So it's easy. It sets you at ease. It gets you into a groove of talking. Second, it draws in your audience because it gives them something to connect to. They can identify with something in that story. Now they perk up in their seats and they're listening. So it's huge that way. And then third, what it does is it gives you something that you can draw back to throughout your talk. So you get to, at the end, your conclusion could be a complete throwback to how you started it, but you can also reference it all the way through. So if you find that good story, it is such an important device because, again, if you're up there and you freeze for a second, you've got that story to fall back to. You can actually cheat and bring that back in. How does that apply to the last thing you were talking about? Well, you try to think about where you wanted to go next. And then, on top of it, I'll just say, do rehearse it. Rehearse your talk, because the more familiar you are with your talk, one, the less you're going to read off your slides. Two, when you get stuck, you can wing it. I mean, I've never, except for TEDx, who forced me to do it, I have never written out an entire talk. I just practice it. I see what's on the slide in 2 seconds. I know exactly what I want to say. And the rest is all just, to Chloe's point, it's all, in the moment improv. I'm not, practicing a rehearsed speech. So if you practice it a few times, you'll never give the same speech twice, but you'll be so much more effective when you're standing on stage.
Yeah. We got a shout out to Dave Security. So a thumbs up from the audience for Dave Security. Wow. I think I'm dyslexic verbally today. One thing we haven't talked about is the Antistellar, that I think some people think that they're submitting a stellar proposal, but what they've really done is either a boilerplate or even worse, a product pitch. So anybody want to touch on, Chloe, let's start with you, because I know this is a big one for you. Can I ever have a stellar proposal that's really just a product pitch?
I kid you not, in job interviews, when I'm talking to companies about whether or not how to do a pitch and how to do talks, I always say, if you make this into a sales pitch, you're going to agitate and make people very angry, and boards will reject your talks. The thing is, even RSA conference, even though it's a very corporate event, the thing to keep note of is that they want a talk about what is a problem and how you're applying that solution. What is the solution to that problem? It's not, let me tell you about our product and why you should buy this product. Anyone who goes to a talk and it's someone pushing a product, Like, you're going to lose your audience attention. It's not a demo. Your talk is not a demo. Talks are about information and solutions, and it's never, ever a demo. If you make anything into a demo, like, you will not be able to give a talk again in some conferences, because they will now get note of it. And security community, we're small and tight. So if you do something like that, we're going to be hesitant to accept another talk from you.
So I think Chloe covered that one really well. So I'm not even going to touch it, because that is perfect. And that is a frustration every CFP committee deals with. Mine is put the effort in. Quite honestly, I've seen other CFP reviewers actually complain about it and subtweet it in public. I generally don't like to do that, but I can tell you it's a frustration for everybody who's ever been on a CFP committee. You get that one, and I mentioned before, like, you'll get that submission where the abstract is 1 or 2 sentences long. There's no way you told me what you needed to about your talk in those 1 to 2 sentences. If the committee is asking for an outline, which a lot of the bigger ones, especially, you know, like Black Hat and RSA, they do expect an outline of your talk. You better have something. Doesn't mean you have to have your whole talk written, but you got to give them a good outline so they at least understand what the flow of your talk is going to be. They can see what you're planning and some of the points. And then the last one is, I've been on committees where it's a conference that asks for, like, your takeaways, 3 to 5 takeaways. That's another big one with RSA and Black Hat. You know, have something there. Like, I've seen, you know, just be complete, show them, you know, have respect for the CFP committee. You want them to respect you. You got to respect their time too. And if you come to them with, you know, something you slosh together in 30 seconds, that, you know, that's not going to wow them. Chloe alluded to it before. I keep a number of CFPs because I submit sort of the same talk to multiple conferences, but I change it and I'm constantly revising it. Do that. Keep working on it. It should be a fluid document, and you should keep revising, and you should craft it specific to the conference so that your talk fits with whatever their theme is or that sort of thing. So yeah, that for me is by far my biggest pet peeve.
Yeah, you may not have to reinvent the wheel, but it may need to get a different color or have tie some strings to it. So we have time to go around the horn one more time, and I'd love us to wrap with, if you, and Tanisha, let's start with you. After you got that first rejection, if you could go back to yourself and now knowing what it is that you've created some wow submissions, you've gotten to conferences, what would you tell yourself as you're reading that rejection letter to help yourself be able to know exactly what to do next time? Not just build confidence, but really what specifically to do in the next time that you submitted when you had a wow.
I think, like Alyssa said, is to do your research. Make sure that what you're writing aligns with the audience that's going to be at the conference, and that it aligns with, you know, whatever their theme or the track is, you know, that it makes sense for that audience. Just because it's related, you know, generally related to cybersecurity doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a one size fits all. I've seen people who give, you know, pretty much like the same themed talk, you know, at a lot of different conferences, but, you know, they change it, you know, from conference, depending on, you know, what the theme of that conference is. So I would just say, do the research and actually just put the time in. So, you know, when I submitted my very first one, you know, I was like, I don't know what this is supposed to be, you know, so I've definitely learned some things from, you know, Chloe and Alyssa in here, you know, just as far as doing, you know, what is my next one. But I'd say do the research and then, you know, rely on the people that you know who have been here before. I think way too often we are trying to go at this thing, you know, as silos, as opposed to, you know, using our communities. And like Chloe said, you know, cybersecurity is definitely a tight-knit community, but I'd like to think about us as family. And, you know, I'd say most of the people within the community are willing to help and are trying to make a difference, you know, for the next generation of cybersecurity. So rely on those people, you know, use the resources that you have, network.
Chloe, what would you tell past Chloe?
Oh man, I had my first CFP was the issues of being a woman in InfoSec, because in my first year, I did not know I would walk into the 1940s. And so I created this talk, but the thing was that I didn't really write it. What happened was, like, I wrote out an outline of what I want to talk about, and then I gave it to my mentor, who is a guy. And then he gave it to his friend. I asked for another friend to review it, which was a guy. And so what ended up happening was that it was written by men in the end, talking about the issues for women in cybersecurity. So I got rejected from WESIS, was my first conference I submitted. My second conference rejection was Diana Initiative. And I realized, why is this happening? And then I realized because I wasn't being myself in it. I had 2 people review it. So this is really important. When you have people review your CFPs, make sure it's someone who's not going to take away that voice, your authenticity, because if they do, then you don't show your passion. You don't show who you are when you write your abstract. So that's what I would say. I just don't get someone else to write it for you. Write it yourself.
Okay, and Alyssa, real quick.
Yep, I'll just build on that. It's that authenticity theme again. And for me, I'm going to borrow a phrase from a colleague of mine, Phil Garbashek. What's your weird? Whatever that thing about you is that makes you weird is also the thing that makes you interesting. You don't have to hide it. Embrace it and put it out there. Make that your brand. I wish there's so many of my first talks where, you know, I tried to have that corporate tone and I thought that's what I had to do to be taken seriously and whatever. And you know what? It was when I dropped that and I wasn't afraid to tell people that I was a hacker and these other things. That's when it took off for me. I embraced my weird. So find your weird, whatever it is, that thing that makes you unique. Throw it out there, make that you, put a brand out there.
And that with the research and your voice, that is going to be stellar. So thank you all. So thank you so much to this incredible panel for sharing your story and your stories and your passion and your honesty. Thank you to everybody who submitted a question. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we appreciate everybody who wrote in, and we appreciate your time today. And we thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.